Welcome everybody to our next session of economics. This is on pricing and advertising, and I think it's a particularly interesting section that we're going to deal with price discrimination in particular. So just to go through the various topics, we're first going to look at the conditions for price discrimination. What do you need to be able as a firm what are the conditions necessary for this to take place? We're going to have a look at perfect price discrimination, followed by group, multi-market price discrimination. We're also going to look at nonlinear or quantity price discrimination. And these are what you need to know for your tests. Two-part pricing we're going to leave out, so you don't need to know that, as well as tie-in sales. The last section that you do need to cover is advertising. All right, so I'm going to look at various examples of price discrimination. And the first thing that I typically say to students, because I'm passionate about economics and I think it relates to so much what goes on in your lives. The first thing I say to them is, why do we care about price discrimination? Okay. Often you see things in a textbook and you think, oh, maybe it's just another boring theory. But in actual fact, as I said, it pertains to your everyday life. It affects it. So, for example, like if you wanted to go on take a coach to Johannesburg, you might get a student discount. There could be student discounts on movies, etc. When you bulk buy, say buy two get one free, etc. When you use loyalty cards, for example, you go and get a coffee, and many coffee shops stamp your coffee card, and you get, say, every 10th coffee free. Well, that's actually changing the per unit price of that cup of coffee. Pensioners discounts, etc. A very relevant example to your lives is cookies, not the choc chip variety that I'm very fond of making, but the ones that track where you've been on the internet, probably the ones that you don't want your mother to have a look at. And cookies can and they will be held against you. Okay, so they track your browsing history. And it can be very interesting to clear your cache, your browsing history, and have a look at what difference that makes to the price that you offered online. So this is an example of price discrimination in your lives that affects you. So sometimes if you clear your browsing history, your cache, you'll find that they offer you a lower price because they think you're a first-time buyer, say to eBay or whatever site it might be, and they offer you a lower price. Other times, they might offer a lower price to somebody they believe, like an airline, when your cache and your browsing history shows that you have been to other airlines, you visited those, they might therefore realize you're price sensitive, you've shopped around, and they may therefore offer you a lower price. So next time you're trying to purchase something online, be aware of this. It may also vary according to location, so where in the world you log in from. Africa often paying low prices than, say, Europe. It can make a difference as to what type of operating system you're logging in from. So whether you're using iOS or Android might make a difference to the price that you charged. All to do with the cookies, this keeping this information. So the internet has made price discrimination that much easier to practice. Okay, so various examples, as I say, online, etc., and getting different deals. And as it shows there, you can see that iOS, you might be offered a lower price, might be higher, it depending on the particular company and the circumstances. Okay, so what is price discrimination? It's charging different prices for the same product, but a key assumption is that your costs of production are the same, okay, for each unit. So price differences that arise due to cost differences, this is not price discrimination. Okay, so we're assuming that it costs the same to provide these units to the consumer, but you charge different prices. And why do firms price discriminate? It's because it allows them to capture some of the consumer surplus, or possibly all consumer surplus, and they can make greater profits. In order to price discriminate, because you might think, well, companies can get away with price discriminating. There are three conditions, and these are really important. It's important that you know these three conditions. The first is that a firm's got to have market power. So it's got to have a little bit of, like we've talked about, monopoly power, etc. It has to have some market power. If there's lots of competition, you're not going to be able to get away with perhaps charging a higher price. Consumers must also differ in their sensitivity to the price. So there'll be a group that are more sensitive to the price, say that's your students or your pensioners, and then versus, say, the rest of the population. And finally, it's very important to be able to prevent resales. So if one group gets it cheaper and they simply resell to the other group, your price discrimination isn't going to work. So that's an important condition too. Now, if you think about this, think about an example. Say you've got a small town and there's just one plumber, okay? So the plumber's got market power, therefore, the only one in the town. This plumber, say, can go off to various people's homes and is able to ascertain their sensitivity to price, how price elastic or inelastic their demand is. Perhaps by looking at their home and saying, oh, they've got DSTV, nice car parked in the driveway, maybe they can afford to pay a little bit more. Obviously, in that instance, it's going to be very difficult or impossible, basically, for your customer to resell that service. So that would be an example of where price discrimination would operate. Okay. Perfect price discrimination. I'm going to start off with discrimination in the first degree. What is this? Here we see that each unit is sold to a consumer for their maximum willingness to pay. Okay, so their reservation price, in other words, the maximum we know that a person's willing to pay for a particular unit of their commodity. So your demand curve becomes like a marginal revenue curve. Okay, so if for a given unit, how much they're willing to pay is going to be the marginal revenue. It's what you're going to get from that unit. So obviously firms require knowledge of each consumer's reservation price. And that used to be quite difficult to ascertain. This kind of seemed like a very far-fetched, it's sort of one end of the spectrum where price discrimination was concerned. But when it comes to the internet, it has made it far more possible to practice perfect price discrimination. I'm going to give you an example just now. Okay, let's illustrate this by means of a diagram. This is perfect price discrimination. We're going to take discrete units and we're going to see how much somebody's willing to pay. Say for that first unit, they're willing to pay $6, okay? $6 there. You can take whatever currency. For a second unit, they're willing to pay $5, right? For a third unit, $4, etc. Okay. And we know that firms will continue to produce. So that basically gives you, each time you're getting the marginal revenue, because that's the price that you're going to charge. You're going to charge 6 and then 5 and then 4, etc. So that becomes your marginal revenue. From the first unit, your marginal revenue is 6, then it's 5, etc., then 4. So your demand is like your marginal revenue curve too, each time. And they're going to produce up until where your marginal cost just equals your marginal revenue. So this will be up to this unit here, up to your fourth unit where marginal cost of 3 just equals the marginal revenue of 3, what somebody's willing to pay and what you're going to charge them. So the entire area underneath, below your price and above your marginal cost, that was, before it was consumer surplus, now it becomes producer surplus. So remember what consumer surplus was. If somebody was, say, willing to pay 6 up here, and now they, and say they were only charged 3, your consumer surplus would have been that difference between 6 and 3. Whereas now, if they're willing to pay 6, they charge that. So that entire area above the marginal cost curve, up to what they're willing to pay, becomes producer surplus. They capture that consumer surplus, and this and this. Okay, so they capture that entire area as producer surplus. We can take a more continuous diagram, not just discrete units, so also including like 1.5, etc., units and so on. And we get a diagram that looks like this. And this shows you a comparison between perfect competition, between the type of monopolist that you've studied previously, a simple monopolist that only charges one price. And we now introduce the new price discriminating monopolist. So remember that from our diagram previously, where does a perfectly competitive market operate? Where your marginal cost, okay, here, your marginal cost intersects your demand curve, your market demand curve, and that will be your competitive output, and the price charged is that. Okay, so what will consumer surplus be? It'll be the area, that'll be the price charge. It'll be the area below the demand curve, okay, below this demand curve here. And above the price line, it'll be areas A, B, and C. That's consumer surplus under perfect competition. Producer surplus will be the area below that price line, okay, and above your marginal cost curve. So areas D and E will be producer surplus. What happens with a simple monopolist, the one from first year, that charges one price? It operates, because it's one firm, according to that amnesia rule I taught you about, where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So that's going to be where there's your marginal revenue, there's your marginal cost. It's going to operate here, and you're going to go up to your demand curve, okay, and the price charge is going to be this, okay. So the area below the demand curve, as shown here, and above the price, area A will be consumer surplus. Areas B and D are going to be producer surplus. The area below the price charged up until the output that it produces here, and above your marginal cost curves, area B and D form producer surplus. And area C and E are deadweight loss. They are not gained by anybody. So it's a loss to society. So it's lost output, because we can see that under perfect competition, more would have been produced, and you would have charged a slightly lower price to those consumers than this price that the simple monopolist is charging. These consumers here would have been brought into the market. But now they lost with a simple monopolist that charges one price. However, if we want to look at the perfect price discriminating firm, what's the difference? Okay, let's just erase all of this so that we can see what's going to happen now. Okay. Now, your perfect price discriminating firm is going to charge each consumer, say for a first unit, they're going to charge their maximum willingness to pay as given by the demand curve. Second unit, they're going to charge the same, okay, maximum willingness to pay, etc. And so on. They're going to charge each time consumers, according to the demand curve, their reservation price. And so as a result, this entire area below your demand curve and above your marginal cost curve, all these areas, A, B, C, D, and E, are all captured as producer surplus, because they charged each customer their maximum willingness to pay. So the entire area is gained as producer surplus to those producers. There is no deadweight loss, all right, as opposed to the firm that charges one price. So from a societal point of view, it's actually quite efficient, okay, because there's no deadweight loss. Same output will end up being produced. They're going to produce up until where the price charge on the last unit just equals the marginal cost. So up to here. So that's the same output as under perfect competition. So they're efficient from that point of view. There is one key difference, though. We know that in perfect competition, price is always equal to marginal cost, because in equilibrium, MR equals MC for a firm, and we know that that's also equal to price. However, here, it's only the last unit that is where this last unit here, where the customer is going to be charged a price just equal to marginal cost. Above that, customers are going to be charged different prices. Okay? So a key difference then from perfect competition is that it's only the last unit where a consumer is charged a price equal to marginal cost. But same output, no dead weight lost. Another huge difference is obviously that there's no consumer surplus, unlike with perfect competition. So consumers would definitely prefer perfect competition. Although we can't say that this is worse than perfect competition, because producers gain and they in turn employ people and give them jobs and income. So it's just who gains and who loses. But you can't make a judgment call on that. All right, there are some notes on this. So this just goes through the diagram as I've been explaining. So you can go through this and have a look. Okay. What are some of the problems with trying to practice first degree price discrimination? And that's the cost of gathering information, like what is everybody's reservation price? And I did allude to the fact that the internet has made this easier to do. Okay, so for instance, we see online auction type systems set up. So you can, if you want a product, for example, you can indicate what is the maximum you're willing to pay for that item. And if you don't, you will lose that item in that bidding process. Companies also pay way more to be, say, on the first page, their advert to appear on a first page of a Google search. So if you're looking for, say, a particular, you're going through, you've had a car accident, you're looking for a particular type of lawyer, and they want advertising space on the first page of a Google search, they'll have to elicit their maximum willingness to pay in order to get that top spot. The textbook goes through an example with Botox, and it looks at the marginal cost of producing it, which you can see in this diagram is very low. In this particular instance, there's a constant marginal cost curve, which is equal to average cost, okay? The red line there. And you can see that and compare what's going to happen if you have, say, a simple monopolist, which produces where the marginal revenue curve intersects the marginal cost. It's going to produce that amount, go up to the demand curve. That'll be the price charge. So your consumer surplus will be the blue triangle, producer surplus, the green, dead weight loss, the gray. Where will perfect competition, where would it have operated? Where your marginal cost or your supply curve equals your demand curve over here, much greater output produced, and this is the price charged, equal to marginal cost. So that entire area becomes consumer surplus, the area below the demand curve and above the price that's charged, equal to marginal cost. So it's all consumer surplus. And in this particular instance, because you've got a constant marginal cost curve, there won't be any producer surplus, okay? Difference between the price charged and your marginal cost here is zero. So there's no producer surplus there because of a constant marginal cost. As opposed to your new kind of firm that you're looking at, one that can practice first degree price discrimination, it's going to charge everybody according to the various points on the demand curve, their reservation price. And so this entire area, okay, would be captured as producer surplus. Consumer surplus would be zero. And that's a lot of profit there. Okay. Second thing we're going to look at today is quantity or nonlinear price discrimination. And this occurs when, according to how much, the quantity that you purchase. So, for example, examples of this are like your buy 2 t-shirts, get a third free. It's changing the per unit price. Even those loyalty cards, your coffee loyalty card is an example. So we find that most customers are willing to pay more for your first unit as opposed to successive units. I remember that first piece of chocolate cake or the first beer, etc., always gives you much greater marginal satisfaction, and it declines with the amount that you consume. So customers are usually willing to pay more for the first unit than for successive. And we know that a demand curve's downward sloping. So how this works is according to block pricing. So you charge one price, say, for the first block or first units of usage, and then different prices for subsequent blocks. Okay, so let's take a diagram. Here we can see on the left-hand side is an example of your second degree or price discrimination. So for this block, for somebody consuming, say, up to 20 units, they charged a price of 70. Okay. Then for those that consume, or for a customer consuming between 20 and 40 units, they're going to be charged this price of 50. You can see, though, that within a particular group, within this block, there is still some consumer surplus. You might have been willing to pay more than 70. Somebody's willing to pay, say, 85, 80, etc. So there's still a little bit of consumer surplus left, that area there. And likewise, in the second block, willingness to pay is there, but the price being paid is lower than that. So there's still little green triangles represent your consumer surplus. Your producer surplus in this first block would be the difference between the price that's actually charged and your marginal cost of producing that. That's your producer surplus, so it'll be that 800, you work it out for that first block, and then you can work it out again for this block, another 400, and so you get overall, this is your producer surplus of 1,200. So there's still a little bit of a deadweight loss. We see this here because this producer doesn't produce up until the point where on the last unit, your marginal cost is just equal to the price charge. It doesn't produce there, and equal to your marginal revenue. Like under perfect competition, there is a deadweight loss. However, let's compare this to a simple monopolist that charges only, or single price monopolist that only charges one price. Where would that have operated? Where your MR, okay, equals your MC here, this output, you go up to your demand curve, yeah, and that's the price charged. Okay, so your consumer surplus would have been this area, your producer surplus, the area below the price line up until what's produced and above your marginal cost. So you can see there that area of 900. Okay, deadweight loss is shown here on the right-hand side by this grey triangle. Okay, perfect competition would have produced up until that point. So this is the deadweight loss, the grey triangle. So a couple of things we can conclude. There's less of a deadweight loss with quantity discrimination on the left-hand side. Smaller deadweight loss because by having more blocks, okay, and charging a couple of different prices, you're actually producing more output. So there's greater output with quantity discrimination than on the right-hand side under single price monopoly. Greater output, less of a deadweight loss, etc. Lower consumer surplus though. So you can see the welfare ramifications there. But it would be more efficient because more is at least is produced, and the deadweight loss is slightly less than under a single price monopolist. Obviously, again, perfect competition would be superior from an efficiency point of view. The more blocks that you can actually have, the closer you're going to get to first degree price discrimination, where you have less of an efficiency loss, etc., greater for welfare. The final type of price discrimination that we're going to look at is multi-market or third degree price discrimination. And what this is basically charging two different groups of consumers a different price. So again, you don't have different costs of providing it to those groups. That's a key thing here. Remember that. But you charge them different prices. So these two groups, but everybody within a particular group, you're going to charge the same price to. So you might do this, like companies do this with different countries. So they might provide a DVD, for instance, a movie, to a certain market, like the US market at one price and the UK market at a different price. And how these groups differ is in their sensitivity to price, their price elasticity of demand. So the one group, in this instance, let's say group 2, will be the consumers with a relatively more price elastic demand. Okay, they are more sensitive to the price. And because they are more sensitive to the price, they're going to obviously be charged a lower price because they're not willing to pay a high price. Whereas opposed to the other group with a lower price elasticity of demand, or their demand is more price inelastic, they are going to be less sensitive. And so to that price, can charge them a high price. Let's have a look at this. So this is an example with DVD, Harry Potter, Mamma Mia, differs according to the version of the textbook you've got. But we can see the two groups here. So on the left-hand side, you've got the United States. Right-hand side, you've got the United Kingdom. So this company is targeting these two groups differently. On the left-hand side, for the United States, we can see your demand curve is actually flatter. So that is the group that's got the more price elastic demand, okay? As opposed to the right-hand side over here, you can see you've got your demand curve is going to be steeper, and so they are more price inelastic, less sensitive to the price. And as we can see, they are therefore charged a higher price than this group. So let's see how it works. Critical assumption, same costs to both groups. You can see that, same marginal cost in each instance. And all you do, once you've broken the market into two, is profit maximize in each segment. So your golden rule, MR equals MC. So we can see that's going to happen here. MR is equal to MC here. This is your output. Go up to the demand curve, and that's going to be your price charged. As opposed to here, MR equals to MC here. Go up to the demand curve, and there's your price charged. So we can see that the United Kingdom charged a higher price than the United States because of the different sensitivities of demand to the price. You can actually work this out, and you can, by finding an expression for marginal revenue for each group, we can work out what the actual ratio of prices is going to be to each group. We can work out what to charge them. And we find that we get an expression. This is the part that you need to remember for a test, is this. This is the critical thing, is that the ratio of prices of the one group to the other is inversely related to the elasticity for that group. So you'll find that for group 1, the prices up here, its elasticity is sort of diagonally opposite. And likewise with P2, the price for that group and its elasticity are diagonally opposite. So if you remember that, it's quite easy to remember this formula. So it's just the ratio of prices P1 to P2 is depends on this kind of ratio of elasticities. And you can substitute in for group 1. So usually we put the group that's got the more inelastic demand, that's willing to pay a higher price. But it really doesn't matter which you use, as long as you keep consistent. If you had an MCQ question, as long as you've got that group's price and elasticity diagonally opposite, at the end you can work out the ratio, and you know that group paying the higher price is the one with the more inelastic demand, okay, less sensitive to price. So it doesn't really matter, and I'm going to do a worked example of this with you in your Zoom session for the week. So that'll help you. So and the example we'll take is like a sports match. You find that, say, like a soccer match at Moses Mabhida Stadium, you could have a ratio of prices, say students versus the rest of the public. And what's the ratio of prices charged? So what's the welfare like under this final type, this group price discrimination or third degree, where we've got the two groups? We find that it's going to be lower, obviously, than under perfect competition or perfect price discrimination. Less will be produced, there'll be a bit of a dead weight loss, etc. However, welfare can be lower or higher than it is with a single price monopoly. And that depends. Like if you go back to this diagram and have a look, it depends what is your total output like in relation to, if you add these two outputs together, what is it like as opposed to a simple monopolist that charges one price and its output, which is greater. So it depends is the answer. But certainly welfare would be greater with perfect competition or first degree price discrimination than it would be with group price discrimination. Okay, so another example you can try on your own, and this is the one that we'll tackle in the Zoom session together. This brings us to the last part of today's session, which is on advertising. And a question one often poses to students is, should a company always advertise? Does it always pay to advertise? And most people answer yes. No, advertising is always a good thing. Well, it actually isn't. The answer is it depends. Okay. And hopefully this example will show you why. So what does advertising do for a company? We aim to shift the demand curve, okay? Increase demand for a product and possibly to change your elasticity to make consumers more price inelastic, their demand for an item, to convince them that there just aren't any other substitutes for the product. So we see that if we take a diagram, that what advertising will do is to increase your demand. Okay, it shifts it out, and accordingly your MR curve will also shift out, corresponding to the new demand curve. Okay, so we would therefore be tempted to conclude, okay, that's definitely a good thing. However, we need to consider what our profits were like before and what they're like now. So before, if you take this example, we can see that the price charge, here we go, where were we? This was our demand curve. Yeah, okay. And our marginal revenue curve was there. So our MR intersected MC at this point, and that was the quantity of 24. Go up to your demand curve at that output, and this was the price charge of 11. Okay, there. So your profit would have been the difference between 11 price and your average cost. Remember, when you want to get to work out profit, it's the difference between average revenue or price and average cost. Here, given as 5. So you've got 6 units times by 24. So this is your profit here. Okay, this box here. What will your profit be like when advertising increases your demand and it shifts out? Okay. Your firm will now operate with a new MR equals MC. This is your output of 28. Go up to the demand curve, price charge is 12. Okay, so to work out your profit, it'll be the difference between average revenue, 12, and 5. Okay, it's going to be 7, okay, per unit, times by the quantity of 28, and you can get your new area of profit. Okay, so we can see that it goes from 144 initially to 196. So before advertising, your profit is worked out as your average revenue, 11 minus 5, 6 per unit times 24, 144. Whereas now, okay, your profit we can see is now it's 12, price goes up, minus your average revenue, minus your average cost of 5, times the number of units, we get a value of 196. So you may be tempted to go, okay, so profit's risen. However, that is gross profit. It ignores the cost of advertising. All right. So another way of looking at it is, what was our profit like before? Profit 1 was 144. And what was the benefit? What's the net benefit of this advertising? The difference between profit now, 196, and before, 144, is 52. Okay. And that gives us our gross profit. But we need to take this benefit that we get and subtract off the cost of advertising, and that gives us our net profit. So what is our gross profit? We need to subtract off the cost of advertising. Let's take an example over the page. Let's assume that an advertising costs 45, it could be 45 million or whatever. What was our benefit from that advertising? It was 52. The difference between the profit now, 196, minus what it was before, 144. So your benefit from advertising was 52. Well, that's greater than the cost, therefore go for it. Your net profit is increased, the firm should advertise. However, if your cost of advertising is 60, say 60 million, the benefit is only 52, that's below the cost of advertising. Your net profit will fall, and it does not pay for this firm to enter into advertising. This, along with some of the other stuff we're going to do a little later, shows you that it depends on many things as to whether advertising actually pays. It's not something that you should enter into lightly. So I really hope that today's session has made clear to you that economics is way more than just learning boring theories, etc., out of a textbook. Going to Ishaka for a day trip, locals being charged a different price from people, say, from Gauteng. When you're trying to purchase DVDs online or music, whatever it is, being charged different prices according to your browsing history, the coffees that you go and purchase from a coffee shop, your clothing and the quantity discounts that could be offered. These can all be examples of price discrimination. And I hope that by studying it today, you can see the relevance of economics to your lives, and you can now start to understand how that operates, and as a firm, what happens and how it changes profit.